Greetings all, welcome to another session here of Tuzi Talks. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion of literacy instruction for English language learners. Today we're going to be focusing on helping English language learners become biliterate. And one thing you should know is that a lot of this information comes from that textbook right over there, Literacy Instruction for English Language Learners by Cloud, Jeunesse, and Hamayan. You can stop by the bookstore or order it online if you are interested. All right, today, as I said, we'll be focusing on biliteracy. So we're going to be looking at a couple of things today. First, we'll look at the benefits of home language, taking advantage of using home language, or the first language, L1. We'll be looking at the levels of biliteracy, and also we'll be looking at how we can use the L1 literacy to support L2. And finally, we'll look at some of the social aspects of biliteracy and how they can also be used to strengthen students so that they can become more biliterate. All right, the role of home language or first language. One of the first things that's important here is that beginning literacy is better in the first language. You may have students that come into your classrooms and they may not know their first language as far as reading and writing is concerned. They may be able to communicate in the first language, but they may not know how to read and write in the first language. So if they're trying to learn a second language, it's going to be better for them to first learn how to read and write in their first language and then begin to do that in the second language. That's just the research indicates that that's the way it is. Because they know the first language, they can communicate in the first language, making the association from sound to picture to pictograph to writing is going to be easier for them than if they're trying to do both listening, speaking, reading, writing of the second language all at the same time. All right, so it's better that they have it in the first language. Therefore, if you have students who don't have it in the first language, it would be easier for them. It would be more beneficial for you as a teacher if you could get your students to be literate in the first language before they begin working in literacy in the second language. All right, second point is that L1 literacy supports L2 literacy development, as I was just trying to say earlier. Students who already understand the concept of the connecting sounds to letters are going to make an easier transition when they try to do it in a second language. They know all of the words in their first language, and then making the connection is going to be easier for them. And this is regardless of the language, whether they're using normal script like English uses, or whether they're using characters like Chinese and Japanese. If they have that L1 literacy background in their first language, it'll support the development into their second language. So the home language is a benefit there. It is, what we're going to talk about later, is that bootstrapping. L1 literacy also strengthens L1 identity. And when you're learning a language, associated with it is a second culture and a second identity. The same is true with the first language. You have a first language, a first culture, and a first identity. Someone who knows how to read and write in their own culture, in their own language, are going to have a stronger identity with that culture and language. And that's a good thing. I realize that you want to get your students to learn a second language, but having dual is going to definitely be a plus for the student, both in terms of identity and in terms of their academic career. Point number 4, there are benefits to knowing what a student's L1 is. So one of the things that you should be doing is taking an inventory of what your students know, where they come from, what their L1 literacy skills are, what their knowledge base is. And you can use this to your advantage when you're trying to teach them literacy in the second language, because again, one piggybacks off the other many times, so you can use it to your advantage. Number 5, the L1 filling in gaps for L2. And this is often the case where students don't understand something and they go back to their L1 literacy skills, tips, tricks in order to try to help them learn the second language. This is what Cloud, Jeunesse, and Hamayan call bootstrapping. I've never heard that before, but I definitely understand what they're saying. They're using the L1 is helping to kickstart the L2. It's a great thing to have. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But it's definitely a good trick and tip to have there. Associated with this is that we have something called cross-linguistic transfer that is promoting metalinguistic awareness. So when they talk about bootstrapping, that's actually what cross-linguistic transfer is all about. And it allows them to be thinking about language. Metalinguistic awareness is all about that. Thinking about language. We don't normally think about language, so especially when you just have one language, you don't think of the components of it. So cross-linguistic transfer, knowing both languages, is definitely going to be a plus for the students. So as you can see, there are many benefits to being literate in the first language when you try to learn the second language. Now, some of the benefits of metalinguistic awareness include increased learning strategies. You know, as someone who has already learned a first language, and they're now trying to learn a second language, it's a trick. It's an idea they can use to go back to that first language and say, oh, look, there's a comparison here. I see how they're doing this because I do it in my language. Or I see that this word sounds similar to this word. And they can make that crossover, and they can start getting some strategies for learning language. It increases their strategies. Increased strategies gives them control, and control will give them confidence. And so they'll have more confidence because they have those added strategies, because they're more aware of what language is and how it's used. Some of the strategies that they're going to gain are things like word consciousness. You know, they're going to realize that agriculture in their language is similar, that mom is similar to in their language, or father, or automobile. They're going to be able to see, oh, there's a connection with these words. And it's going to begin to enable them to think about the connections of other words so that they can learn some of those strategies. They're going to understand more about morphology. And your typical native speaker, they don't think about morphology at all, not at least until they get up into the higher grades. And they're not really making a comparison because they don't know the comparison, because they don't know that other language. Bilingual learners, they're going to have the ability to say, oh, look, I see how this morpheme in one language is similar to this one, and they can make the transfer. They can start, code switching back and forth. That's a big plus. Using cognates would be another one, where they get to see multiple words that have the same meaning, and so that's going to be another strategy for them. So being biliterate is going to enable them to have more strategies and some benefits because they have those two languages. In addition to, now it's important to recognize that when you get students coming into your classes, they won't be at the same level of biliteracy. You'll have some students that literally have no skills whatsoever. They don't know how to read, they don't know how to write, they don't know how to recognize anything in their first language. So they're essentially illiterate. They can communicate all well. They can do, all of the communications that they need, but they cannot read and write. And so you're going to have problems with those. Those kids are going to need some level of literacy in their first language before you can move them on to literacy in the second language. You're going to have students that may have limited L1 literacy. They may have gone to school for 6 months or for a year, but they didn't get a lot of help. They may come from a culture that does not focus on literacy, and so even before they go to school, there are some cultures that teach literacy right away in the home, but your students may not have that. And of course, you may have students that have the literacy that's expected of them at that age level. Those kids, you're going to be able to move on more quickly. You're going to be able to take advantage of the literacy that they have in the L1 and use that to help them move along into the L2. But you need to investigate your students to find out what they know, what they don't know, what skills you can take advantage of, and what skills then you realize they need to learn these before I can go on. So you may have a classroom that is mixed, and in many cases that's probably going to be the case. Now, it's important to remember that you can use the first language to help support the second language. So if you have a literacy program in your school, and you may want to separate them out. If you do not have a program like that, students that don't have L1 literacy are definitely going to be hampered. It's always better to enroll students with no literacy skills in their first language into a literacy program for the L1. And I would insist that you encourage these students, these non-literate L1 students, to enroll in a program for them so that they can learn their first language. You should also encourage the family and the community to get them involved in a literacy program. If there is no literacy program in your school or in the area, look for outside school activities. Look for the home. Look for the family. Look for the community or some nonprofit organization that can help teach these students literacy in their first language. Definitely going to help you as a teacher, and you're trying to get them into learning English. Recognize that there are some L1, L2 transfer possibilities. There are words, there are phrases, there are grammar structures that can transfer, and students will try to bootstrap that into English. There are also pitfalls, rules that do not apply in one language that apply in the other. A clear example I have is someone who constantly, that I know, a friend of mine, who constantly does a double past tense. I did went to the store instead of I did go to the store. That's a transfer from his first language, and that's a bad transfer. That would be a pitfall. But there are positive transfers, and you can see a lot of those. I know a lot of people who talk about going to Italy after they know Spanish and Portuguese, and they say the transfer is a lot easier. There are only a few important things necessary to switch over. So there are benefits, there are possible abilities that they have to bootstrap into English. You can also use bilingual and culturally relevant books to try to make this transfer. In other words, use the background knowledge that they already have. Use a bilingual book that may be available that has cultural background information that's going to acclimate them better, because they know kind of the information already, but they're seeing it now in English, and they're going to be able to make a transfer a little bit better. You may also do activities with books, and you can do some metalinguistic analysis. Again, you're analyzing the material there. You're analyzing things like the morphemes and the phrasal structures, so that they can see how the similarities and the differences are. In addition to biliteracy, there's also a social aspect of identity. And we talked a little bit about this before, but when you learn a language, you learn an identity that goes with it. When you learn a language, you learn a culture that goes with it. Culture and language are inseparable in the same way, so is an identity. And so as a person learns a first language, they're going to get a first identity. If they learn the literacy behind it, they're going to have a stronger sense of identity within that. So biliteracy gives you a different identity. Some would say you have two identities, one in the one language, one in the other language. At the same time, you are, as a biliterate person, you're the odd man out. You're the go-between. You're the mediator, because you can understand a little bit of both sides. You're the bodhisattva. You're standing in between the gap of these two areas. And so you have a different identity that goes on there because of your biliteracy. In addition, your biliteracy and community is the same type of idea here, is that within the community you're going to be a different type of person because you are biliterate. And you can provide benefits, but at the same time it also creates barriers. People I know who have gone overseas to study and then return back to their country are less accepted in many ways because they're, in a sense, tainted by this outside community, tainted by this outside group because they're biliterate. And so that's an aspect of the society that you're going to have to grapple with. All right. Implications for teachers. 1, you should encourage L1 literacy in school and outside of school. You want to make sure that your students understand their first language, reading and writing. You want to try to get them to use that, if for no other reason, to help you strengthen their second language skills. Number 2, use L1 when advantageous. Now, in bilingual circles, that may be something that you want to do often. Take advantage of it. There are other people who will say that you're supposed to avoid using the L1. Again, as I mentioned in earlier sessions, I talked about something called the direct method, which is a brand, a style, a method of teaching language where you do not use the L1 at all whatsoever. Now, typically this is used with older students, and they already have literacy in their first language. It is also extremely frustrating, and I have met several students who quit their language program because the teacher was using the direct method, and there was too much pressure. The affective filter was too high. Okay, I agree with the authors here that you should use it when it's advantageous. You want to keep that affective filter low enough so that it's interesting and it's a little bit of a struggle, but not too low that it's boring, not too high that they're overwhelmed. Point number 3, hire bilingual instructors. Now, in a bilingual program, that's exactly the type of instructor that you would want. You would want a bilingual instructor. There are going to be other places where they will not want you to be a bilingual instructor. They want you to understand only one language, again, to force the direct method type of learning. In a bilingual program, it's to the advantage of the students and the program to have someone who knows both languages. They understand the difficulties, the struggles. They understand the cultural aspects of it, and so it's to that advantage. Recommendation that you hire bilingual instructors. Number 4, remember the objectives of the program. You want to get these students involved in mainstream academic opportunities. At the same time, you would like them to be bilingual. Fully bilingual students generally do better on tests, generally do better in school. And so that's a definite objective, to have bilingual students. And lastly, you want to remember and honor the cultural distinctives. There are many good things in all cultures. There are many bad things in all cultures. But you want to understand what those differences are and show some respect there. At the same time, you also want to say to your students, when in Rome, you do as the Romans. Now that we're in this culture, the mainstream culture, you need to understand what those differences are and try to adapt. And that's all I have for this little lesson here. I do thank you for stopping by. If you have any questions or concerns, you can shoot me a little message down there. And if not, you guys have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.